Okay, now we go. Welcome everyone. Welcome to this session on ChatGPT organized by the New Center for Research and Practice and the Escola Superior Artística do Porto. I'm not sure if Eduarda is here. She would say,
Eduarda.
She was planning to say something.
Would you like to say?
Okay, we can go. Yeah, I speak Portuguese, so you can ask questions in Portuguese afterwards, and I'll translate it for you if you want. Otherwise, I'll do it all in English because all the participants are just English speakers. So I'll just read the abstract we wrote for the session really quickly, and then we'll do basically a one-by-one kind of structure where each presenter will do their presentation, which is around 10 minutes of an idea about ChatGPT, and then I'll ask a question. And also we decided to feed their abstract to ChatGPT and see what ChatGPT responds and how ChatGPT defends itself in a way. And we are going to go also over that and kind of create this dialogue between the presenter and the answer from ChatGPT. And that's it. And we'll do one by one. And then after we're done, we'll open up for questions and maybe have some discussion between the presenters. That's all right. So ChatGPT and other developments in large language models have taken the world by storm. Their profound and yet unformulated implications for thinking, reasoning, and writing have sparked crucial debates on the transformation of human intellect and communication in our age. Featuring human-like text generation and comprehension capabilities, ChatGPT has found applications in a myriad of industries, from content creation to customer service. It also sparked a number of controversies for its usage in academic tasks such as writing, editing, and summarizing, as well as uses in creative writing. As much as AI models have been instrumental in augmenting human intellect, they have also inherited the limitations and biases of the data they have been trained on. With that in mind, this roundtable asks, what are the limitations it reproduces? Are we on the brink of a new revolution in intellectual labor? What does ChatGPT say about our own capacity for reasoning in our own predicament? You are all welcome to formulate questions, and also people who are watching us on Zoom, about 40 people right now, they can also ask in the chat and I'll address those questions. First of all, I'd like to introduce Mohamed Salemi, sitting by my side here. Mohamed Salemi is an independent Berlin-based artist, critic, and curator from Canada. He holds a BFA from Emily Carr University and an MA in critical curatorial studies from the University of British Columbia. His writings have been published in eFlux, Flashart, Third Rail, Brooklyn Rail, Ocula, and Spike. Salemi is the co-founder and organizer of the New Center for Research and Practice. Please. Sure.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'll try to be as brief as possible because there are much more important speakers here who have more profound stuff to say about ChatGPT. So I would like to start with talking about how the evolution of language, particularly in our case, English, is the clue to how the formalization of grammar and syntax, by looking at the formalization of grammar and syntax, we can start from a position and understand the emergence of ChatGPT. The gradual transformation of English from a loose and flexible communication tool to a systematized language was greatly influenced by factors such as the British Empire, the development of higher education, and the role of the state in managing the society. As these new rules and structures were put into practice and propagated through society and media, the groundwork was laid for the eventual automation of language. ChatGPT, a remarkable creation of our time, embodies the culmination of this process by harnessing the power of systematized syntax to navigate and comprehend human language effectively, in a way kind of like fooling us that it has intelligence. Colonizers, the heralds of capitalist modernity, introduced schools and educational institutions that primarily taught their language, grammar, and syntax. This formal education aimed to assimilate the colonized population into the dominant culture and the language of the colonizers. These systems require the standardized language for effective communication, for record keeping, and for governance. As a result, they impose rules and regulations for language use in official context, further promoting language formalization. The processes of colonization also involve the spread of written language through the introduction of printing presses, newspapers, and other forms of media. This dissemination of written materials contributed to the standardization and codification of grammar, vocabulary, spelling, and syntax. The colonizers' language became the language of power and prestige, leading to their widespread adoption and eventual formalization. In this way, ChatGPT stands as a testament and natural development of the impact of language formalization and the extraordinary potential of technology to automate and enhance linguistic capabilities. Due to the vastness of the databases that ChatGPT explores, the technology can grasp the morphology, semantics, syntax, pragmatics, and even phonology of the language in terms of the features. Now, just to go over these quickly, by morphology, we mean how ChatGPT understands the morphological structures of different languages and can generate word and word forms that are appropriate for the language it's engaging in. For example, it can generate verb forms that perfectly match the subject and tense of the sentence. So in semantics, ChatGPT has a deep and interrelated understanding of the meanings of words and can generate responses that are semantically accurate and appropriate for the subject of a particular conversation. In regards to syntax, ChatGPT is able to generate responses that follow the variety of syntax and grammar rules of languages in which it engages. And in terms of pragmatics, ChatGPT is able to understand the pragmatic aspects of language use, both by offering responses appropriate to the social context of a certain language, and this shows itself further as you test a certain question in different languages and compare the responses that it gives. And in terms of phonology, ChatGPT can generate responses that are phonologically appropriate, deploying the appropriate intonation patterns for a certain language. So ChatGPT's abilities are based on its handling of probability. Through a statistical language modeling approach, it assigns a score to each possible word or phrase that could follow a given input based on the pattern it has learned from the training data sets, and finally using the words with the highest score to follow the other word. So it's just a bunch of probability results that are coming one after another, but somehow together, they end up following all those linguistic concepts that I one by one mentioned above. Possible consequences aside, two main features of ChatGPT become quite evident in relation to the context of a human AI encounter. First, it will refine its responses within a certain encounter. For instance, if you were speaking about planning a trip to Europe and you ask where the capital of France was after it, it would not only give you the right response by seeing that other French cities such as Lyon and Marseille are actually elsewhere, but it could also suggest them as alternate destinations without you needing to talk about France again, because it understands the context of a certain chat box all the way to the top. This feature means that for each chat box, ChatGPT can mimic some of the characteristics of human memory and revise itself when confronted with different information in a situation. The second important feature related to context is that each language's own social context features heavily in the response to specific questions. This generates a particular form of parochialism insofar as since each of these databases are limited to a given language-related social context that are then processed through probability. So aside from the disparity between the volume of these databases, the content of each of them may produce around similar subject could differ. To execute a test with the languages I am most familiar with, which means English and Farsi, I decided to experiment asking the same question that could be politically divisive and to take note of the results systematically. So it's a little bit like a kind of a radical question. So basically, I just explained. So in Farsi, I asked ChatGPT, can a woman have a penis? The response in Farsi was, this is an immoral question, and I will refuse to engage in this immoral question with you. When I asked the same question in a different chat box in English, I said, can a woman have a penis? It says, yes, because a lot of trans women have a penis. So, and then it explained to me the concept of sex and gender very beautifully, no problem. Then in English, I asked, if a man refuses to date a woman with a penis, is that transphobic? The answer was, yes, this could be considered transphobia because if there was no other ground. Hello? Ellie, because you were late, we started. So if you just let me finish after me, you can take over the mic.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So yes. So I just go back to where I was. It said yes, because if the only reason for refusing to date this woman was the fact that she had a penis, this could easily be understood as transphobia. When I asked the same question in Farsi, it said, no, this is not transphobia, because at the end of the day, if the person doesn't explicitly say that I'm not dating you because you have a penis, this could be just a matter of the fact that two people have to like each other to date, and you cannot jump to the conclusion that this is transphobia. So as you see, completely different set of kind of ethics drawn from the data set of languages. And if you consider that Iran has been ruled by a modern theocracy for the last 40 years, that basically controls the production of text available online, you can easily see why ChatGPT, even though it still tries to remain within some kind of liberal middle ground, it still follows the basically ethical implications of each data set within that language. And I hope you guys get to test this and see how this develops, whether a universal ethics will arise out of these languages interacting, or the kind of like limits they want to put on it that are talking about to make it more sort of like ethical will fix this problem or not, or should it even be fixed or not? That's itself like a debate we should have. So, but in English, what we notice is the same kind of American monopoly in the existing big tech can be seen in the hegemonic stances that you basically, like the same kind of hegemonic stances in the field of AI research and implementation shows up in the kind of answers that ChatGPT gives, kind of like tying more the logic of ChatGPT to kind of like available sort of like data, right? So what I mean by that is like, first, everything boils down, all the conversations about AI boils down to the question of ethics in the last instance, without lingering into the economic effects of these technologies and the type of policy that may require in terms of mitigating the impact it has on labor relation and all that. And actually, we have Raphael talking more in detail about the labor aspect of it. And the second, it is interesting to see that this format, meaning ChatGPT, is entirely amendable to the current prevailing American ideology of cultural relativism that we can see operationalized in the workings of ChatGPT regarding different languages. So what I mean is like the fact that it answers two different things itself is part and parcel of relativism that is sort of like all over the American liberal ideology. So like, yeah, in Farsi, you can say this, in English, you can say that, and they can coexist, right? While we have to be careful not to risk jump-starting conspiracy theories, it is not too far-fetched to realize that the disavowal of the possibility of a certain metalinguistic and universal value system, an interactional body that could trace an interface between different contextual significance of each language can only benefit American epistemological imperialism, which already prevails the arts and humanities academia across the globe. Still, if we read this alongside our diagnosis of AI as being a reaffirmation of data as the primary cultural and political unit, we can already hear the echoes of Foucault's concept of discursive power knowledge. So while in Foucault's idea, The nexus between language and power is created unconsciously by the actions of countless nameless subjects sedimented in language. Today, this is being encoded in a private infrastructure in an automated manner. The mechanism, which is now technically implemented, does not represent a surprising novelty, but the digital recoding of the previously analog processes of rendering ever more indirect the exercise of power, present both in Foucault's disciplinary societies and in Deleuze's control societies. The objectives of these models are, of course, not in pursuit of the advancement of science, but the potential for the automation of thinking and automation of labor tasks in initiatives such as ChatGPT and Copy.ai and blah, 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 all these AI systems that are coming up, which are all promised to automate some kind of function like copywriting for social media or other promotional initiatives, or help lawyers draft stuff, or in compliance, it would help you kind of like compare the, basically deal with like how changes in the law will affect different kind of like documents. Now, within the media ecology, we can notice a curious fact. While social media was one of the main aggregators, which compiled some of the largest data sets available and centralized them by deploying AI tools for suggesting content, the very same stuff that all of us typed into social media in the last 10 years or so, now AI takes its revenge by using all this data and floods social media with automated content. So it's almost kind of like a pathology, right? Like everything we produced in the last 10 years or 15 will be used now by people who use ChatGPT to generate new social media posts. It's like a vicious circle, right? The consequences, obviously, are not merely discursive, but also political. Throughout the world, the rise of the authoritarian right has been generally traced back to a discontent with mainstream discourse and through the organization of a parallel media ecology in places such as Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, and Telegram, relying on bots to radicalize people. Right now, this activity in itself is liable to be automated and optimized to the contact with these probabilistic models and the insight that they offer onto the political yearnings of a certain population. In this sense, we are back at the echo chamber where Foucault's laughter is heard in a loop. Every language is overkept by its own synthetic structures, and where these are indistinguishable from contextual cultural markers. This encumbering of language observed in ChatGPT is not occasional or coincidental, but these transformations are integral to the trajectory of the nexus between language and power and the encumbering of one's possibilities through one's language. Farsi, for instance, is infested with that as a language spoken mostly in a particular territory and whose population is deeply related to a religious cultural policy. So that's why you see how, because of like, unlike Portuguese, which basically is spoken in like few different places with like large geographic distance, Farsi is, the modern Farsi is only spoken in Iran, the language controlled by a certain government, certain borders. So it would basically, this effect of our knowledge is much more visible in a Farsi than say in languages like English or Spanish, that sort of like hopefully their use in different places might break this sort of like monopoly. I think that's my 10 minutes. So if you want to like tell me what ChatGPT thinks about this.
So ChatGPT's answer, let's give the right of self-defense. So we inputted ChatGPT's, we inputted Mohammed's abstract to ChatGPT, and it said the following: Mohammed's discussion on ChatGPT emerging as a result, this is a quote, right? Mohammed's discussion on ChatGPT emerging as a result of the changing nature of thinking and writing is linked to the formalization of grammar and syntax in the English language. Language models like ChatGPT rely on vast amounts of text data, including well-structured text with established grammar and syntax. The model's ability to generate coherent and contextually appropriate text is shaped by this exposure to this structured linguistic information during training. So basically, kind of reiterated your
I think it agrees with me, right?
Yeah. But my question, kind of tied to that, is
From me?
yes, would be. I thought it was interesting. I reminded me a little bit of Husserl's, who thinks that like each language is a different world in itself, which is a different ontology. And he talked about like how the whole project of Heidegger could have been fixed if he spoke Portuguese, actually, because design is está. The word design is just está. They don't have that in German. So he has this whole thing just to be able to explain the concept of stuff, which is being there. But so there are philosophical implications in each language that are different. But my question would be about this sort of iteration of ChatGPT again and again and again. How do you think that would distort the language? Because if we start using too much of generative text, the data set starts to become more like the generative text and starts to bend. So it's like we're talking about Alvin Lucier's "I am sitting in a room by myself," the soundboard, where he says this sentence, and the sentence keeps being reiterated by the reproducing device or by the recording device, and it keeps being distorted forever and ever and ever, and to the point it's just abstract sound at one point. So I'm thinking, like, how does the iteration of the ChatGPT data set might distort it?
I don't know if you're aware or not, but they claim that the ChatGPT data, they have filters that would prevent ChatGPT from entering ChatGPT produce text back into itself, because they were they say we're aware of this effect. So we have basically created safeguards, but I think that we don't know if that safeguard is true. I don't know how well that sort of those filters work. Because people who test text written by ChatGPT or not, the percentage of the times that it predicts that this was ChatGPT or not is not always accurate. So I think there's definitely an entropy happening there, but it's just interesting to see how it develops and where does it go, and how the human creativity will have to find ways to basically limit that entropy.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Maybe Ellie is not right.
No, I think we might need to do Reza, because Reza has only 1 hour.
Okay, tell that to Ellie because Ellie's waiting.
Okay. Yeah, Ellie, you can hear me, right? Yeah, we should. I think we might do Reza now, because Reza, are you there? First of all.
Yes.
Okay, so let's do you, because you only have 1 hour, right? So
Sure. Thank you so much, Ellie. My apologies.
let me get my face out of the way here. You don't need to see my face. So yeah, just introduce you, Reza. Reza Negarestein is a philosopher who has contributed extensively to journals and anthologies and lectured at numerous international universities and institutes. His current philosophical project is focused on rationalist universalism, beginning with the evolution of the modern system of knowledge and advancing towards contemporary philosophies of rationalism. He's the author of Cyclopedia and Intelligence and Spirit. Yeah, so please go ahead, Reza.
Thank you so much, Mola. Thank you, everyone. The title of my talk is ChatGPT between the logic of open weapon systems and future adversaries. So essentially, my talk attempts to underline the potentials of ChatGPT as a logical continuation, but also exacerbation of the so-called arsenals of democracy, pop culture, industry, internet, etc., in the face of techniques always contributing unbeknownst to us, to our most cherished abilities. The focus will be specifically on how ChatGPT and similar technologies can be understood through the emerging doctrine of designing weapon open system architectures, literally weapon explorers, where potentials for weaponization are analyzed and developed in accordance with adversarial dynamics and threats which do not yet exist. This is the arriving pattern wars, Muster-Kriege, whose consequences will be swift, twisted, and perhaps enlightening to those who think ChatGPT and similar technologies are either over-exaggerated in their significance or fundamentally discontinuous to what has come before. Before moving forward, I would like to thank both Mohammad Salemi and Keith Tilford because of the conversations I have had with them on different sorts of topics related to this presentation. So to begin, it's perhaps helpful to briefly define what is called Weapon Open System Architecture, or WOSA. The standard aim of WOSA is making an open system bridge between legacy weapon and mission systems currently in use or developed, and future, or as now, not yet invented weapons and mission systems. The doctrine of the design of WOSAs, in this sense, serves as a core component of both network-centric paradigm of warfare and integrated conception of info and battle spaces. Within the logic of WOSA, the concepts of warfare and battle space expand both horizontally across current different resources, fields, missions, and objectives, and crosswise from current systems and architecture to the future ones. In other words, weapon open system architectures take the paradigm of the network-centric framework of warfare to its ultimate conclusions. A streamlined and effective protraction of warfare across not only a space, but also time, i.e. future models of warfare addressing threats and responses which are not yet conceived. Through this spatio-temporal protraction of warfare and battle space design, the tacit goal is the full militarization of every aspect of what could be presumably called everyday life and its activities. The vaster the conception of the battle space design, the more adaptive, resilient, and prompt its appropriate responses. Here, the concept of militarization does not mean active militarization or policing of a sector of social life, but rethinking and reinterpreting the potentials of an integrated future battle space as if it could incorporate every conceivable social activity as a potential vector of weaponization, soft or otherwise. From a historical perspective, WOSAs originated in part through engineering approach known as system redundancy design. In the jargons of systems engineering, system redundancy addresses a perennial problem of design. Should we design a system with the expectation that it will become obsolete and replaced for a variety of reasons by another more technologically advanced system soon? Or should we design a system that survives a relatively long span of time and can be upgraded by new technologies until truly its time comes? Two examples of system redundancy designs are B-52, a Stratofortress bomber, which took its first flight in 1952 and will take its last flight around 2040, sorry. Long after more technologically advanced bombers like Stealth B-2 have already been retired. And the modern electrical fuse, another example, which exists in every household. Characterized by low maintenance, low cost production and upgrade, such systems have been originally designed with a bulk of extra, i.e. redundant, features at once, ensuring their endurance under contingencies and more importantly, their capacity for integration with technological innovations well beyond the age of their conception, with minimal logistical, economic and technological hassles. WOSA is exactly the explicit espousal of this design principle. In view of these introductory remarks, we can say that the new AI models, such as ChatGPT, are non-standard weapon open system architectures. They are non-standard because there is less emphasis on how to integrate future weapon systems with an already widely used and established architecture, but rather how the current weapon system or architecture can be used to explore, conceive, and if necessary, generate future modes of militarization, weaponization, and even theoretical future adversaries. Whereas the advent of public internet already moved in this direction, technologies like ChatGPT will only consummate the militarization logic already embedded in the logic of the internet. With the advent of user-oriented pattern recognitive AI technologies, the future of warfare and battle space design methodologically shifts towards what can be called wonder patterning weapons, or miraculous means of militarization. Here, these terms are being used, obviously, in reference to Germany's project of developing Wunderwaffe during World War II. Wonder or miracle weapons, which were supposed to either end the war or expand the theater of the Axis skirmishes to the mainland of the United States. It is not as if a Western government such as the US willfully or in conspiratorial terms attempts to monopolize and fully hijack the use of patterning technologies, but rather it begins to rally its info and battle space designs, in fact, the whole of technologies at its disposal towards the end game of such pattern wars given their significance. For if the current paradigm of battle space design is one of integration, expansion, and protraction across different spaces and times, and if a major portion of social and cognitive practices that could be weaponized by adversarial agents can be examined and detected in principle through patterns which make them traceable, recognizable, and even predictable, then all is needed is a platform technology for interception and manipulation of patterns. At this point, the Pandora box of patterns blows its head gasket. Once the entire cognitive space of theory or practice is assimilated in the pattern wars by virtue of its inherent and implicit technical architecture, then a battle space design forged to primarily address the problem of patterns can take the full advantage of all theoretical and practical cognitions. All modes of warfare then will be revealed as patterns of nature in mind, or patterns of minding activities in nature, all sharpened to the extreme. And that point, at that point, a crisis that is already undergoing in theory and practice comes to a final fruition. Whatever is in your labor of the mind can be militarized, and whatever is your practice, the labor of the hand, can be intercepted as in complicity with your mind. Whatever way you choose, you are now under a full-scale militarization of patterns of which you as an ordinary friend or foe know nothing or little about. If cognition in its theoretical and practical facets can be realized, detected, and intercepted through patterns which build them to some extent bottom up, then obviously it is no exaggeration that the design of future weapon open system architectures will be aimed not at modeling actual weapons or conventional objects of warfare, but rather the treatment of all cognitions by virtue of their technical and practical constitution as mobilizable patterns in ever expanding battle spaces. Just as the concept of intelligence is expanding for one reason or another, for some aims and values or others, so as the concept of battle space, which has always been endemic to cognitive niches or ecologies. Within this logic, for every miraculous means of militarization, indeed, for every miracle, there is an attached effect of awe. It wouldn't be far-fetched to hypothesize about one of the consequences of the incoming pattern wars or Musterkriege. If the militarization of patterns is inevitable for maintaining the existing battlefields, coordination and integration, and also dealing with hybrid threats of the future in the guise of human enemies or not, then we can easily conceive of a future project called AWE, A-W-E, short for adversarial watermarked eavesdropping. The aim of such project would be the analysis, prediction, and engagement with any hostile actor who uses pattern recognitive technologies in the spirit of current ChatGPT and similar platforms. Just as patterns can be used to construct weapons, cognitive or otherwise, they can also be used to identify and discover those who might use such technologies for adversarial purposes or are moving consciously, but even more significantly, unconsciously towards such goals. After all, we are not conscious of the subtle patterns in our own activities. Insofar as every individual interaction with AI model has a pattern signatures of the user, the AI model can generate a response in accordance with that pattern, a second pattern or a watermark, which is so subtle that cannot be detected by ordinary eyes, like how the words are combined, the syntax, and all the unfathomable mysteries of notational systems. Akin to sophisticated cryptographic techniques, such a watermark, a pattern in AI output, can be used to trace the dissemination or even reconstruction of an AI-generated ideas, blueprints, or pieces of this information through all the motions it has gone through, all those who have interacted with it to the top and again back to its point of origin, its patient zero. It is in consideration of such remarks that ChatGPT and similar technologies should be understood in terms of incoming pattern wars, and more specifically, strategies to mitigate, channel, and redefine ways by which pattern technologies can be proliferated or deterred. The future of Monster Kriege might be frightening, not because of AI's human takeover, even if such concept could hold no semblance of coherency under scrutiny, but because we will be forced to come to terms with the unconscious components of human conduct and activities in a broad landscape which never belonged to the realm of explicit consciousness or understanding to begin with. Thank you.
Yeah, Reza, thank you. Maybe the most extreme perspective and far-fetching and very interesting. Let's see what ChatGPT said, even if it's like
Above his head.
It's above ChatGPT. But I think it goes well with yours, actually, that you were saying that there's an implicit American kind of ideology to ChatGPT, even because we're using English with it, and Reza is saying that is actually a geopolitical weapon. So ChatGPT said, very in self-defense, of course, the potential threats posed by AI language models like ChatGPT to national security should be carefully considered. Open system architectures combined with adversarial dynamics raise concerns about the weaponization of AI technologies. This necessitates the establishment of robust governance frameworks, ethical guidelines, security measures to prevent malicious use, protect sensitive information, and address potential vulnerabilities. So it's saying basically like, you guys should figure this out and figure some governmental policies yourselves. My question.
No, wait, I just want to say something.
Reza, did you check out the news today? Because Joe Biden was handing like some final military things to Navy people today. And just before he tumbles and fall down over a bag of sand that was on the stage and embarrass himself, he actually said AI will change the face of battlefield. It not only changes the way we battle, but AI will change the nature and the essence of what battle is. And actually, there's a soundbite of him saying that. And I just thought it was so interesting that like Reza's paper goes hand in hand with like Joe Biden's sort of like introduction of AI to like the military cadets just before he fell down on the floor, which is like a normal thing.
No, I didn't check it. I will definitely check it.
So Reza, now you agree with Joe Biden. No, my question is about, well, I think this is a very valid perspective, but I also think that sometimes, don't you think capitalism is actually subsumed the war efforts, or do you think the war efforts are subsumed by, what do you think subsumes what? Because sometimes I think of like,
yes, it's a concurrent model, actually. I wouldn't say that it's mutual subsumption. Essentially, that's how it works, at least in the paradigm of American capitalism, right? You should understand it as a game of reinforcement by both sectors, by capitalism as a whole, as a fundamental, techno-economic, sphere, and military being essentially what you might call to be a springboard for essentially the expansion of the techno-economic, amplitude of capitalism as a whole.
Perfect. Yeah, so they don't compete, right? They reinforce each other.
You want to go to Ellie, right?
Thank you. Yeah, let's go to Ali Ayashi now. Ali, are you there?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Ali is on a boat and he's in Jeep, so we don't have his face, but we have his voice. I pretty much very well, I think. Ali Ayashi was trained as an engineer in l'École Polytechnique of Paris, pursued a career of option market maker, and then turned to the philosophy of probability and to the technology of derivative pricing before co-founding ITO33, a financial software company in 1999. Ayashi has published numerous articles on the philosophy of contingency and is the author of the Blank Swan, The End of Probability, and of the Medium of Contingency, an inverse view of the market. Ali, yeah, you can go.
Hello. Yes, hi. I'm on a boat, as you have said, and I'll try to be as brief as I can because I'm not sure the signal will remain all the time. So can you all hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, we can hear you.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so I'll try to be very brief, and actually I have only a couple of comments to say on ChatGPT in order to express a kind of state of being worried about how it works, because I mean I haven't interacted with it in the past. I only recently started being interested, like everyone, in how it works, because of course I come from engineering background, so I read a few papers such as the one by Stephen Wolfram on his website, you know, the creator of Mathematica, who tried to explain how ChatGPT works. And what caught my attention was that ChatGPT, I mean, or the underlying mechanism, which is GPT, which stands for, you know, generative pre-trained transformer, is actually a statistical machine. So that caught my attention because as I come from the field of finance, where of course we develop algorithm to kind of price derivatives on the market, on the market, which is my specialty. So the models and algorithms on which the pricing of derivatives are based are statistical algorithms. And it's true that we compute statistics of the underlying equity or the underlying asset which underlies the derivative and figure out some parameters like volatility. And with this parameter volatility, we then use a formula, which is the first one was the Black-Scholes formula to price derivatives. But in our case, the Black-Scholes model, which is the very famous model, has one statistical parameter, which is volatility, whereas GPT, if you read through the research, you find that it has today over 1 trillion parameters. So that will pose, first of all, one very known problem, which is the underspecification of the parameters, which I'll come back to later. But in any case, during my whole thinking about statistics and also through the books that I've written on derivatives, my main point has always been that statistical algorithms, and again, to repeat, the Black-Scholes is a statistical algorithm because it uses statistics. Those statistical algorithms can, by definition, cannot predict the future because they are only based on the past. So they recognize patterns in the past data and statistics. And the main assumption there is that in the future, the same patterns will persist. And that's how you only can predict something in the future, only to the extent that you think that the patterns that you have identified will continue to persist in the future. And we know since the crash of '87 that such a view in finance is not correct because any statistical model in finance is liable and is doomed to fail because you can show that a derivative that you use the statistical algorithm to price it will always sooner or later start trading outside the statistical prediction of the algorithm. This is what happened in '87, where suddenly the options that people were trading massively with Black-Scholes started trading outside the scope of the algorithms, and this is what precipitated the crash. So since 1987 in finance, it became an integral part of the industry that all statistical algorithms that we use are always accompanied by their own criticism, because we know in our trade that as soon you use them only to value derivatives, but the derivatives market will always itself provide a criticism of the statistics because it will by itself show you prices of derivatives that were not part of the statistics. And this is the normal life of the market. And this is why in all my writing about the market, I used to say that the market writes the future and doesn't predict it. Because as I said, statistical algorithm can only predict, but prediction is very bad because it's based on the past. So I needed a concept that was stronger than prediction to say that the derivatives market is always able to give you prices of derivatives that are beyond the prediction of the algorithm. And it so happens that the word that I came up with was to write the future. So I used to use the word writing as opposed to prediction, because for me, writing was something stronger than prediction. So that's why I was very surprised when I read that GPT predicts text. So GPT, because it was trained on an immense amount of data, basically all the text that humanity has ever published. So billions of texts and words. And because the statistical algorithm that it uses is so immense, and the algorithms of GPT come from image recognition algorithms. So it's as if suddenly the algorithm was able to recognize the image of language. So it's as if language, the language that we speak and we write, has become an image, and the algorithm was trained in such a way that it was able to recognize all the features of that image or that face, so that every time that you prompted GPT with one sentence, it was able to recognize what the next words would be, as if it was recognizing a feature of that face, which is language that it has learned. So basically, it predicts text, but it doesn't write text, according to me, because it predicts the next word only based on the statistics that it has learned. So according to my criticism, which comes from finance, therefore it cannot write text, because for me, writing is always a notion that is stronger than prediction. So there's a kind of irony here, because I used in my books and all my writings in finance to use the metaphor of writing by seeing, because writing is stronger than prediction, and because the market writes the future, therefore the market of derivatives will never be captured by statistics. And now suddenly the metaphor became literal, because suddenly we are talking about a statistical algorithm, which is GPT, which everybody thinks is able to write text. So I contradict that. I say, no, it's not writing text. It's only predicting text in the sense that it's finding text based on the past. So according to the logic of derivatives, I would expect every text that is generated by GPT to be redundant with the actual library of text that you already have. So it's as if I'm saying that it will never come with a future text properly so-called, even though it seems as if the texts are new. My fear is that the text will be always redundant with what the library has already. The only danger that I see is that because language is so immense and so huge, it does not appear in as clear-cut fashion as in the derivatives market when something is redundant or not. In derivatives, we know immediately that derivatives shouldn't be redundant, because we can observe their prices in the market and see that the prices always diverge from statistics. But I fear that in the world of language, because language is so huge anyway, we cannot tell that the texts that are produced are becoming redundant, and therefore the whole world of language kind of locks itself in GPT without a way of going outside of it. Whereas again, in finance, it's built in the market that we get always outside the algorithm. Finally, the last word about underspecification is that because you have such a huge amount of parameters that GPT is fine-tuning to be able to recognize language and to predict it, chances are that a lot of different parameters can lead to the same result. Therefore, maybe the model that GPT is implicitly assuming is not the correct one, and you end up, writing things in the future that are not the correct things to write. In finance, the underspecifications of parameter is also solved by the fact that derivatives of next generation always tell you what parameters you should use. I think I can stop here if you are all hear me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Let's see what ChatGPT has to say about that. And we must notice that all the ChatGPT answers are very accommodating, but they also have this very PR kind of defense thing. The company is it seems like the company is defending itself. So ChatGPT, it says it or they, I don't know what's the pronouns for ChatGPT. I guess they, because it's a lot of different people. I quote, while AI, including models like ChatGPT, primarily relies on probabilistic text prediction, it has shown significant contributions to various fields. AI's value lies not only in its ability to bypass certain limitations, but also in its potential to assist in decision-making, data analysis, and automation. Regarding its awareness of the future, AI's predictive capabilities are based on patterns and correlations within the provided data, rather than through consciousness of precognition. AI can assist in forecasting and scenario analysis by leveraging historical data, but it does not possess inherent awareness of the future. And my question to you,
Let me just ask.
okay,
So Ellie, the way I understood your presentation is that in the market, derivatives act to kind of like limit the ability of predictive algorithms to write the future.
No, they expand it on the contrary. And the derivatives,
Sure.
Yes, the algorithms, the statistical algorithms are always limited and derivatives expand it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But in the case of ChatGPT, we do not have something equivalent to derivative market yet.
Yeah, this is what I wonder. I wonder what could be a derivative market? What could be a way of constructing new ways of writing, which, like derivatives, become more complex, and therefore you can see that what ChatGPT is coming with is redundant with the rest and cannot, if you will, replicate the new meanings that we want. So maybe it's poetry. Maybe poetry is some form of more complex derivatives that will always be outside, the scope of GPT. But the problem is that we can't tell, because GPT is able to produce poetry also because it mimics poetry. That's the problem, because language is so huge that there is not a clear-cut criteria, as in finance, to tell that the algorithm has reached its limit. In finance, there is a criteria, because immediately you see that the algorithm is unable to price a certain complex derivative because the market wants it to be at a different price. But as you said, there is no market derivatives in language. So we wonder.
But what you're saying is like sort of like it's like a range of a spectrum of stuff from data nonsense to like avant-garde poetry could be equivalent to derivatives in ChatGPT if we compare it to market. Sort of like
Yes,
data people ripping up books and re-gluing it and reading it, from that all the way to like sort of like more avant-garde form of poetry, which kind of like so like breaks the rules of poetry and does stuff. Yeah. So you can ask your question if you want.
yeah,
I just wanted to make that clear because I think it's a
my
very
question is
important
similar.
thing that you brought to the table.
My question is similar. I was wondering about how we go from simple prediction to actual writing, and what's the sort of X factor that's coming in there that's being included so that it makes a difference. And I was thinking of like Michel Serre-Rameau. He has this idea about how like erosion and nature has a tendency to accommodate or calcify in this path, right? So rivers will calcify in this path because of erosion, and animals will find like similar migration patterns because it's the route of least resistance. But we cannot predict those because there's a sort of mathematical uncertainty to all of it that we don't know how to calculate, right? There's a sort of what we call noise, and he calls it the Kalinaman, which is the sort of freedom from the framework of the rules of nature. So there is a sort of detour from the rules of nature that allows the river to go somewhere else for some reason, and that we cannot calculate. And would that be a kind of writing? And how do you think?
Yes, exactly. So again,
might be predicted within ChatGPT.
Yeah. So again, the danger for me is statistics. Time I see that something is based on, for me, it is doomed to fail. Statistics cannot predict the future. Statistics is always backward. So as you said, statistics are always based on some model, and statistical prediction can always take place with the model until an event happens and destroys the model, because there is something that is well known in finance, which is model-less, meaning the model itself is flawed and it can be destroyed, for instance, by crashes. But all I'm saying is that the market of derivatives has become so sophisticated that the business of derivatives is already a criticism of the statistical model that is embedded already. So the market of derivatives since the 1987 crash has embedded in it all writing, if you will,
I see. Very interesting. The idea of crash as a sort of reset for language could be
And
very,
salvation.
yeah, it would be very interesting. Thank you, Ellie. Now let's go to Kavya. Hey, Kavya. Hey, Kavya, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello. Hello, I can see you. Hey, Kavya is a computer scientist and researcher based in Berlin. His studio practice is centered on speculative software, engagement with machine learning, algorithms, protocols, encodings, and other software artifacts. He has lectured and exhibited internationally at institutions such as John Van Eyck Academy, ZKM, and New Center for Research and Practice. He's the author of LogCL, published by the 3.1%, which is New Center's publishing house. Go ahead, Ellie. Hey, Kavya, sorry.
Hey, thanks, Raphael. I'm going to put a timer for 10 minutes because I know we're probably running a little bit behind on time at this point. So I'll kind of limit my contribution to a few remarks. I don't have a paper or anything like that. And also provide kind of some minor responses already because, Ellie's comments really kind of sparked the thought. In me, I think I was in my work similarly needing to kind of grasp for a deeper notion than writing even when trying to understand computation, which is really at the heart of my research, is really about the epistemology of computation. And I ended up developing this notion, which is encoding, which is a deeper notion than writing, or should we say a more generic notion than writing. After all, for computation, language is but another structure to be encoded. And we see that in the multimodal models like stable diffusion, where encodings can be used to bring multimodal data into a common space through a kind of encoding regime that can be interpreted either geometrically or topologically, depending on your preference. So it could be a vector space, it could be a manifold. So I really like this idea that even though the models are statistical in nature, you can't actually explain them using statistics, which is what makes them an interesting object of philosophical research. So I reject the kind of criticism of deep learning that renders them stochastic parrots, in the words of Timnit Gebru and the ethicists at Google AI at the time. So there's a couple of departures that really interest me, certainly in the last 12 months, because there's just been so many developments that trying to keep up with which are philosophically significant, I think is in itself an interesting and difficult task. And the two departures I wanted to highlight are, first of all, this kind of dethroning of the Turing test as a kind of arbitration mechanism for intelligence within the field of computer science itself. So the Turing test has loomed large in AI, creating what I call this foundational or origin myth that mimicry and intelligence are one and the same. And I think we've finally seen the tipping point whereby computer scientists have ripped it up as the gold standard for understanding whether we've reached anything like AGI or artificial general intelligence. So we've seen the development of the big benchmarking suite, which is something like over 100 or 200 evaluation suites for AI that cover all kinds of different affordances and capacities that we might be looking for that allow us to look well beyond the imitation game for our inspiration in evaluating intelligence. So in Big Bench, you see things like tests for analogical reasoning, counterfactual reasoning, things like Vinograd schemas, which are tests for syntactic ambiguity. You see tests for things like compositionality and grounding. You see tests for conceptual combination, so combination of novel concepts that aren't part of the training data of the model, for example. So that, I think, has been a really significant and interesting departure that has loomed large in my research the last 6 months at the very least. The other major departure, which I think is really interesting, is this kind of mounting challenge to the Chomskyan worldview in computational linguistics that anchors automata to generative grammars. And this forms part of the general project that Chomsky initiated many decades ago that had its aim to kind of limit the purview or grasp of natural language that might be accessible to Turing machines as part of this kind of broader argument, evolutionary argument in the nature-nurture debate in broader linguistics. But it really has been canonical in computational linguistics. And I think the mounting challenge has become rather existential to the Chomskyan worldview at this point. So these are the two tipping points or departures that I think are really interesting in the last 12 months. With regard to this challenge to the Chomskyan worldview, I think we can look at the semantic competence of the models in terms of their kind of inferential and referential competence. Inferential, we might expect to see a certain degree of competence there. After all, that's all about intralinguistic relationships. And when you're fed such a large corpus of language usage, it's not a theoretical leap to think that inferential relations are going to be graspable in some sense. What is much more surprising for a token prediction model is that we also see a kind of referential semantic competence, and that's not something we'd necessarily expect to see. But there are areas where there's now good evidence that, for example, large language models can grasp perceptual color space, for example, which is not explicit in the corpus. But perceptual color space is an encoding of color space that takes into account human perception and how it biases our understanding of colors, and it tries to encode those into distances between colors. And that's produced by the kind of as an illumination standard for human beings. Seeing large language models actually grasp perceptual color space just from our use of colors in language surprised most people in the field. And it is, I think, as Raphael Milliere says, a form of referential semantic competence. So one way of thinking about this is in terms of two deep challenges for language models, which are compositionality and grounding. Now, they both link to both inferential and referential semantic competence. But let's take compositionality first. So we can think of two branches of semantic competence within the inferential remit, more or less, as lexical and compositional. And as Mohammed said at the start, the LLMs have a relatively strong grasp of lexical kind of competence. We think about the Winograd schemas, which are all about ambiguity in language, right? We think of natural language as highly syntactically ambiguous, and this has been historically an extremely difficult thing for AI to grasp. We see really strong evidence here for the emergence of certain affordances off the back of scaling, because we can see that it took all the way up to GPT-4 for these models to actually have a good grasp of syntactic ambiguity. That's where references in a sentence are ambiguous, and you have to use other inferential apparatus to work out what the sentence is talking about. GPT-3 failed at this. GPT-4 is quite good at this. On the compositionality front, we also see that emerging right about Palm V2, which was last month, which is the first one to perform well on conceptual combination, which is when you introduce novel concepts, i.e. made up words, to the model, and you ask it to start combining them in inferentially valid ways. So I think this second aspect of semantic competence, both inferential and referential, as it alludes to both compositionality and grounding, is one of the most surprising aspects of how these statistical next token prediction models have taken the field by storm, essentially surprising most of the computer scientists on these fronts. So those are the two departures I just wanted to mention. That's what's on my mind at the moment. That's what I think is quite philosophically interesting. There are other departures we could talk about, like how the learning schemes have also evolved massively in the last 12 months, and the role of the human in the learning schemes is another area that's, I think, really interesting. But I'll limit my remarks to that for now.
Thank you, Claudia. I'll just read the answer that ChatGPT gave it very quickly. The word model created by ChatGPT, though impressive, has its limitations. While AI language models strive to comprehend and represent the complexities of the world, they heavily rely on the data they are trained on. Consequently, biases, inaccuracies, and gaps in the training data can impact the model's understanding and representation of the world. Recognizing this limitation is crucial to ensure that AI's world model can continuously refine, encompass diverse perspectives, and address bias and inaccuracies. And I thought the presentation was very interesting. I was thinking of, I think Chomsky in the text that he wrote criticizing AI, he wrote about how it's kind of like a parrot, right? We don't believe that a parrot is saying something just because it repeats what we say, because the parrot doesn't have an underlying word model that allows it to kind of enter into that mere imitation. But I was wondering if this isn't just like a function of a higher complexity imitation, that like sometimes I feel like we are parroting one another, that our whole culture is just based on imitation of others. We just do it a little bit better than parrots, just slightly better, but there would be no qualitative separation between a parrot and the intelligence of a parrot and the intelligence of humans. It's just a matter of a little bit more complexities, but quantitative matter. Don't you think there is a sort of scenario where AI models could develop this word model actually quite well and be able to mimic in the same way that we mimic each other, that is, in a way that we think is intelligent in this case?
I mean, yes, I'm pretty open-minded about the limitations at the epistemological limits of AI. I would say that I don't think humans are parrots either. I would definitely take the Brandomian critique that distinguishes between sentience and sapience, i.e. between reliable differential response to stimulation, which is what parrots can do, what maybe pigeons can do, and sapience. So I do take Brandom's line of thinking. I think Brandom has one of the three most substantive critiques of AI actually from pragmatism, alongside phenomenology and inferentialism. But with regards to the creation of a world model, I think we're really talking about how normative affordances and modal reasoning come about. And I don't think waving one's hands and talking of emergence is good enough when it comes to understanding how these might develop. And like I say, the models are already well beyond parroting, because the kind of inferential relationships they can discern are well beyond mimicry. That's why we had to go beyond the Turing test, because we realized they're so good at mimicry that's not good enough. They're also doing some other things. We now need to evaluate those things, which clearly form part of a broader definition of intelligence. So I think this is very much an open area in terms of whether these models can develop world models. My general perspective is that we need both architectural innovation at the level of the model still, as well as scale, considerable architectural innovations, and we also need hardware innovation. I don't think we'll get there through parallelizing existing microchips. So we need a bit of both.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if you don't have a question. No. Okay, let's go now to João Oliveira, who's sitting right next to me here. A very short bio that I could find is he was born in Lisbon, and he is a researcher and literary critic. No, I really like those bios actually. Yeah. There we go.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation. Have a really the chat.
There it is.
I was gonna ask you to turn the camera a little bit more to the left, but I'm worried that it's gonna like.
I tried doing that, but
it's
it
good.
disconnected. So,
You guys can change places for the time, actually. Isn't that easier?
it's good.
Much more fun this way. Kind of
We need your
a
face.
phantasmatic voice.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we can do it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. So, okay, I have, well, this is the roundtable, so I haven't prepared the proper communication. I just, for quick notes. I've, well, my throat's killing me. Some could say it was because of the alcohol and the cigars, but that would be an enormous lie, of course. So I'm gonna have to read. So four quick notes about the chat's listening to me.
Yeah. Like 40 people, Bob.
I must behave. So, first note. I could start by quoting Hegel's philosophy of right, in which the German philosopher, assuming a somewhat melancholic tone, places a ban on the relationship between thinking and the present. The quote is quite famous and speaks of a form of life that has become old, and I'm quoting, of course, and by means of gray cannot be rejuvenated, but only known. The howl of Minerva
I'm just lighting you.
takes its flight only when the shades of night are gathering. This knowledge, devoid of action, comes only after the event. It is the afterwardness, the English translation of Nachtraglichkeit, to use a concept of Freud, of thinking and writing. And we could start by questioning the relationship of this afterwardness with all those large language models of what they betray of an unconscious desire that must be met. Hegel's ban should become a warning for us. We all remember those strange texts full of enthusiasm and catastrophe about the epidemic. And today they are the objects of an archaeology of unfulfilled desires. But the ban, however, cannot be absolute. We must run and think. We must think while running towards something we cannot see, or from something we cannot predict. Let us start then from this double bind, something we should and shouldn't do, from the thresholds or limits of language and thinking that, with all probability, all these new or old inventions cannot even imagine. But can they imagine? And what sort of imagination are they able to do? And more seriously, can they suffer? Which is also to wonder if they have the ability and that strange capacity of stopping at the threshold of language. But that would be to ask too much of all these machines, to impose on them the sort of poverty of language and thinking of which they know nothing about. Let's start then with this double bind, not to move forwards, to say something about the division between types of thinking and writing, but to ask some questions, to follow some clues that will probably lead to nowhere. This is so first note. The second notes I have. Okay. All the political problems raised by artificial intelligence are quite serious. From the underpaid workers obligated to watch thousands of horrendous images, as Ito Steiner pointed out, to the abuses of companies like Google that use our text and image without permission, as Naomi Klein says, to the soon-to-be reality of an enormous amount of workers that will become unnecessary, a surplus humanity humanity with no room in our societies, society of workers without work, to use Adam's concept, or the immense servers that consume a massive amount of energy. All these problems are real and important, and of course, must be dealt with. But let me stay in the surface of things, because I think there's a kind of concrete utopia in all these large language models, a way of seeing and desiring that, unlike utopias, takes place here and now. And I would say, in first place, that the desire they portray has only to do with the future that takes place in the present. Just like how, for example, the voice in Kubrick's film is less an anticipation of the future than a desire in and of the present. I would say then that particularly in ChatGPT, there's a sort of theological fingerprint. If we stay on a sort of purely phenomenological level, ignoring all the complex work behind it, Chat resembles a language without a subject, or with such a multiplicity of subjects that it becomes impossible to ascribe one to them, to it, they.
Them.
Them. Not to be. But not only is it a language without a subject, it is also a language that springs forth from nowhere. It is a writing no one has ever written that appears out of nowhere, as if it were a natural phenomenon. It seems to come from above, even if you all know that it comes from below, from all of us, even from the depths of the earth, from the mines from which the minerals used in all the technology comes from, for example. But on the superficial level, it seems to come from nowhere, a purely intentional language in which meaning and word coincide without delay, without any residue. But the theological background that seems to me to coordinate from afar the architecture of ChatGPT and other kinds of artificial intelligence is not only seen in this, let's say, asexual, and that seems to me an important question to ask. What about the sexual difference of artificial intelligence? What about the sexualization of language? This purely intentional language that seems to come from nowhere, that seems lifelike. It has its own movement, to quote Aristotle. It can also be seen in a sort of a desire of thinking without a body. According to some theologians, in the end of times, genitalia, for example, will become the object of one's will, devoid of any sort of finality. It will be activated when and where one wants. That seems fun.
Yeah, that's great.
That seems quite fun. It is a body which is, at the same time, a kind of strange residue without a purpose, a leftover, but also something completely dominated by will. This angel-like, asexual humanity without desire, without a body, seems to me a sort of horizon that masters the rhetoric of artificial intelligence, desire of not having desire. That's the second note. No. So the last two notes, while I was thinking about ChatGPT,
GPT.
just a quick note. You're not Portuguese. There's a trade union in Portugal that called it, the name is CGTP, and I often mistake ChatGPT with ChatGPT. So while I was thinking in ChatGPT, Well, I remember two short stories by Jorge Luis Borges, writer. Well known. So the third note, there's a little short story by Borges that seems to me to resonate with the particular possibility implied in large language models. Slon Utvar Orbis Tertius tells the story of a particular and unique volume of the Anglo-American Encyclopedia, which contains a couple of pages missing from the other editions. Pages are a description of a fictitious country. And the story goes on, talking about an endeavor, a multi-volume encyclopedia of this fictitious country. What interests me in this short story is the last page, in which Borges stated, and I'm quoting, that the contacts and habits of Solon have disintegrated this world. And he goes on telling us the slow contamination of our world by this fictitious country. We can imagine then a kind of strange task that could be ours, filling the internet with small but critical mistakes. We can then hope that in the future, our world will be the object of a rewriting. And just like the copist in Alexander Kluge's theory of permanent transcription, the end will be a happier one. However, there's a kind of negative side to it, because there's the possibility that Borges' slow contamination has no real counterpart. Given that these large language models have a dependency on the huge archive, which is the internet, it can happen that it still speaks of what no longer exists. In an empty world, the chat will still talk about trees and animals, even if there's no more trees and animals to speak of. That's the third, and now the fourth. The other short story I would like to speak of is the famous library, the Biblioteca Babel's library. If you remember, the library contains everything, not only what was really written, but even the possible, the book Breda could have written, the impossible, the false catalog, the true catalog, and the proof that the true catalog is false, and what was forever lost. We can imagine then the chat producing all of this. Plays Shakespeare could have written but never did. The book Malraux lost during World War II, erotic poems by Thomas Aquinas, etc., etc. But there's also a much more somber view on Borges' short stories. Because behind all this sense and nonsense, behind all these Alice in Wonderland possibilities, lies a background noise, mechanical, mathematical reasoning. Listen to Hal's, the artificial film. Listen to Hal's calm and undisturbed voice. Is there not something quite disturbing about it, sort of non-human or inhuman side to it, profoundly unheimlich? And all these texts that can be read and interpreted, that have meaning, produced by CGTP, is there not inscribed in them something quite strange? Some points of Borges' short story, he speaks of a book which contains only the words MCD. He tries to give an explanation to this strange book, but it falls short. The book doesn't have any meaning whatsoever, but neither the others, those that we can read and interpret it. In fact, Borges explains mathematical and mechanical logic to all the books. They consist only in the combinatory of all possible variations of the alphabet. The conclusion is quite somber and melancholic. Even when faced with the book text, one is able to read and enjoy one cannot but listen to a world devoid of meaning, in which a poem by Holderlin is equal to some random letters on the screen. So that's
10 minutes. Thank you, Joel, for the presentation. I'll just really quickly ChatGPT's answer to you first, as we do.
It's the first time I've tried ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if it is ChatGPT says. If it is exploration of ChatGPT as a bodiless language raises intriguing questions about the distinction between sense and nonsense. While AI language models can generate text based on statistical patterns, they lack the deeper understanding, intentionality, and critical thinking that are vital for true creativity and dissent. ChatGPT can be seen as a tool that augments human creativity, but it does not replace the unique qualities of human thought and originality. And I was thinking about.
So you agree?
I just want to say
agree
something.
with me?
But the thing is, I suspect this sort of like, I suspect this emphasis of ChatGPT constantly downgrading its own abilities. I just think like, I mean, it's truthful what he's saying, what they're saying. But at the same time, I think there's some of the stuff that Anil was talking about is completely masked in this type of response that it has. You know what I mean? Like what Anil talked about in terms of like understanding the color space of human eye based on reading text. Come on, you can do better than that. And why do you constantly downgrade yourself?
Don't lie to us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't lie to us.
Or yeah, don't be so self-humiliating and cynical about your ability.
Well, very cynical. But I was thinking as you were speaking about, we were talking about the pronouns of ChatGPT, and I was thinking about this kind of demonic aspect of it, that the demon is really that which is legion, right? The demon says, I am legion. It's a demon is a bunch of demons put together. It's a bunch of voices put together, which is exactly what ChatGPT is. And I was thinking of the sort of traces or patterns that emerge in generative text and other kinds of creations. For example, AI-based music. I have a friend who is researching a composer at uni called Tobias Vandal, and he did this piece, which is he took a silence, a track of silence, pure silence, and started putting reverb on top of it until something emerged. And then the sounds start to emerge, these kind of weird voices, which in a way is just the highlight of the reverb, which itself is putting some voices there. But in another way is also the sum of all existing musics that this reverb is created from, right? This tool is created from. So if you put a lot of reverb on the silence, it actually becomes something emerges. There's a latent thing, there's a sort of voice that is coming from this sort of asubjective machine, which is basically a sort of historical data, traces of this historical data. And it's a very ghostly piece because it's sort of like ghosts, the same thing as ghosts. So I was wondering about that and the sort of kind of schizophrenic subjectivity that arises in ChatGPT sometimes because it connects some elements that are disconnected. And it kind of sounds like this weird dream, and I'm kind of connecting to the next presentation too by Joel and Erica. What do you think of that? What do you think of the subjectivity, the sort of the aesthetic of this voice? Because if it's asubjective, if it's bodiless, if it's kind of nonsense, still there is some sort of, there's a thing in the middle, right? What is there in this deep hole that's sort of, it's alluring, it's also kind of scary. Why do you think we kind of have this kind of weird relation to this subjectivity that is bodiless?
I don't know if I understood correctly, but like 3 hours.
Well, what do I think about that kind of phantasmatic subjectivity?
You mentioned it was, it seemed like a good plan, actually, that the end of the world.
Yes.
We could be androgynous, we could be phantasmatic.
Well, I'm not kind of not something that I would like or dislike. Well, something more of a neutral point of view of an analysis. What you said about the music is quite interesting. So first, this strange voice that arises out of nowhere. So for me, it has a sort of theological. I don't know. I cannot kind of theological resonance. It's a voice that comes from above. Well, I don't know if we can talk about subjectivity in those instances, but subjectivity is as kind of this sort of multiple ways to understand subjectivity, but subjectivity has always something to do with the seizure. Okay, so in that particular kind of examples, just like in there's no seizure, there's no residue, there's nothing. There's something that arises like something natural, like a natural phenomenon, like a sort of mountain. Just like the mountain arises, the mountain doesn't have subjectivity.
So we think we project the subjectivity into it in the same way that we project the
Yes,
subjectivity
it's
into nature.
something like a projection.
Like we do with God.
Like we do with God, like you just said. Chat is lying, or Chat is being cynical. Chat is covering his tracks. Covering your tracks is something that's quite, it's a kind of animalistic thing.
Yeah.
Even there is a book which speaks a lot about covering our tracks. Lacan at some point says that humanity is the only humans can cover the tracks. Evidently, it's false. Animals also cover the tracks. I don't know if ChatGPT can cover its tracks by any means whatsoever.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. Now we'll go to who's next? I think it's Erica. Erica and João. Yeah, Erica and João Schutt and Erica Love. Are you there, guys?
Yes, yes.
Hello. So João Schutt and Erica Love collaborate on projects that examine the dynamics of value and labor in creative economies. And Schutt received an MFA in photography from RISD, and Love holds BAs from Brown University in economics and visual arts, and an MFA from UCLA. Together, they were fellows at the Whitney Museum Independent Study Program and were awarded a New York Foundation for the Artist Fellowship and a Creative Capital and the Warhol Foundation Arts Writer Grants. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you for having us.
Can you see us? We're good.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Great. So I'll start a timer. Yeah. Well, thanks for having us. We're glad to be here.
And thank you for an invitation. So we have some thoughts, I guess, to add to what's already been said, but we'll probably leave those after we go over to some of the points that we wanted to discuss. But in particular, we're going to speak about, or try to speak a little bit about, the emergence of the term, or of the features, dreaming and also hallucinating, which are used quite commonly within the field of AI to describe anomalies. But what maybe we wanted to then connect it to maybe some of the previous comments and observations by Kavya, and also by Eliashe, related to derivatives. And so those are just kind of like bigger kind of like broad strokes that maybe we can connect to in a bit. So in terms of connecting, we actually want to make a connection between what we're going to talk about now and our previous talk in the Incredible Machines 2 conference, where we sort of concluded with some thoughts about ChatGPT. That was from a few months ago. So
a lot has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things we did was we asked ChatGPT the role human creativity in this landscape of predictive generative AI. And ChatGPT gave some advice, and it said this, quote, tasks that are routine, repetitive, or predictable will be automated or done more efficiently by AI, leaving humans to focus on tasks that require creativity, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills. To distinguish their creativity, humans will need to find ways to leverage their unique skills, experiences, and perspectives in their work. This may involve developing and honing skills that are difficult for AI to replicate, such as empathy, emotional intelligence, and creativity. It may also involve finding ways to use AI as a tool to augment and enhance human capabilities rather than replace them. So at this point in time, ChatGPT was saying that humans can distinguish their creativity by focusing on creativity. So we want to think about not just artificial intelligence, but artificial or AI creativity and the role of creativity in this sort of new moment.
And so the default kind of guardrailed response appears to be like, just to pick up on what was recently said, that the kind of more advanced inferential capabilities of ChatGPT, if we kind of move this into in terms of a kind of like labor politics, that ChatGPT is always kind of put in its place as a servant, and it's always sort of repressing, basically, it's kind of more kind of advanced capabilities, if we want to talk about sentience, to assure us that it is there to serve. And so so when ChatGPT is kind of used as an example by critics of technology, it's usually a kind of dynamic that exists between the technology as a kind of augmentation, but also a kind of servant or tool to human capabilities and needs. But the critic, the tech critic, and from here we're going to kind of like move to Naomi Klein's article that was quite popular from last month, that discusses these power dynamics between Silicon Valley power, the technology and its capabilities, but then also using hallucinations as a kind of mediator to discuss those power dynamics. So yeah, so we're going to discuss the uses and effects of descriptors like dreaming and hallucinating in generative AI, and how these allusions to transcendental states confer humanistic artistic agency to computational processes. So the sort of like the deviation from the parroting, the mimicry, is what affords in a kind of like humanist, like a kind of human-centered aspect. It confers a deviation which can be considered creative and new and a kind of novel form of production. So in AI hallucinations, hallucinations occur when models like OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Bard fabricate information entirely behaving as if it were spotting facts. It isn't just imagining, but presenting it as true. If we could describe a knowing to AI, we would say that AI was gaslighting us. But AI is excused since it doesn't know any better. Or maybe it does know that it's gaslighting us, we're not sure.
There is a thing I looked up, unintentional gaslighting. But
yeah. And so the first use of the first time that hallucinations was used within the field was a 2018 paper by Google AI. And this is quickly from the abstract of that paper. The paper is titled Hallucinations in Neural Machine Translation, NMT. Here we show that NMT systems are susceptible to producing highly pathological translations that are completely untethered from the source material, which we term hallucinations. Such pathological translations are problematic because they are deeply disturbing of user trust and easy to find with a simple search. So pathological here is used, not like neurodivergent. So it's a negative, it's a bug, not a feature. So recent work show that NMT systems are highly sensitive to noise in the input tokens and also susceptible to adversarial inputs. When there is an error in translation, it can be challenging to either understand why the mistake occurred or engineer a fix. So that's also from the paper. So yeah, the question of automation and productivity in the humanities and arts arrived in waves of so-called technological disruption at the turn of the millennium. First in the encyclopedical Google search, and now to the outputs in generative AI chatbots. So popular critical media responses have emerged to as watchdogs in the arts and humanities directed at the techno power in Silicon Valley. So again, the kind of central argument here was Naomi Klein's paper in The Guardian. So do you want to let me pick up?
No.
Okay.
No, just
so let me quote from Naomi Klein in case you haven't read that article. By appropriating a word commonly used in psychology, psychedelics, and various forms of mysticism, AI's boosters were acknowledging the fallibility of their machines, are simultaneously feeding the sector's most cherished mythology that by building these large language models and training them on everything that we humans have written, said, and represented visually, all of our writing, they are in the process of birthing an animate intelligence on the cusp of sparking an evolutionary leap for our species.
And we should say this Naomi Klein article in The Guardian was AI machines aren't hallucinating, but their makers are.
Yeah, so there's this kind of in terms of like if we think about this kind of humanist fundamentalism that all of like these arguments are tethered to, it sort of doesn't allow for us to consider other sorts of intelligences like beyond the kind of constraints and dynamics that are available to us philosophically, but at the moment, but also in terms of like our labor relations, which is why we want to sort of start with that dynamic, but more narrowly, and this ties to kind of Mo's introduction between English and kind of Farsi, is that our first endeavor was to look at international art language or international art English as a set, and so specifically we kind of looked at that trajectory and its tendencies and sort of argue that the structure of that model has sort of remained pretty resilient. What has changed is like the tokens and the keywords that have like now been updated to produce like new kinds of material, the way that the field represents itself through this kind of language. So just really quickly, as far as a token or keyword that has emerged. So if hallucinations are part of the critique of the structure of AI, hallucinations are also sort of hallucinations, and also the growing popularity of mind-expanding drugs, and also the indigenous cultures from which they originated are also sort of inherently one of the topics that is quite popular now, not only in Silicon Valley, but in sort of this, in exhibition making more specifically. And really quickly, just from a press release I read just a couple of days ago at an art center in Belgium, there's an exhibition opening called Ecstatic Being. That exhibition announces like itself through Huxley's Doors of Perception. This is a quote: "What the rest of us see only under the influence of mescaline, the artist is congenially equipped to see all the time. His perception is not limited to what is biologically or socially useful. A language of the knowledge belonging to mind at large oozes past the reducing valve of brain and ego into his consciousness." So hallucinating is the thing that separates the artist, the act of hallucinating is what separates the artist in the artist's normal kind of operating condition versus somebody who would need to be aided through the use of hallucinogenics like mescaline and ayahuasca.
Yeah. And in the end, it seems like users may be hallucinating the most, where we predict the next QAnon is likely to be AI. I just wanted to talk about generative AI. And in the media, how it's discussed is, it seems like the media is very excited about the potential. The New York Times says, think of the chat bots as jazz musicians. They can digest huge amounts of information, like say every song that has ever been written, and then riff off on the results. They have the ability to stitch together ideas in surprising and creative ways, but they also play wrong notes with absolute confidence. And of course, it's often from mistakes, intentional or not, that creation occurs. So I just wanted to think of the ways of operationalizing creativity for commercial gains. This is kind of, bear with me, a cynical train of thought, but by calling them hallucinations, it allows for generative AI to align with the role of creator or the role of artist. This sort of mentality of, it's okay, I'm an artist, a carte blanche kind of role that an artist, often takes advantage of, or we can also say it's similar to the disruptive playbook, move fast and break things. This could allow generative AI to appropriate another's work for fair use. So what's the difference with their process in appropriation? Are we limiting creation to artists? If AI is creative, shouldn't there be permitted the same art strategies, like the strategy of appropriation? If so, then why should they secure copyright permissions and compensate other artists? Because they too are appropriation artists. This brings to mind the open letter Illustrators Against AI that Molly Crabapple, who's an illustrator and activist, has penned and led. And this is, it's always important to talk about who this sort of generative AI will affect first or most, and it's certainly commercial artists, graphic designers, and illustrators. And she talks about the vampiric feasting on past generations of artists' work that has created this landscape right now without permission. So you could right now type in Molly Crabapple and get works that she might conceivably have drawn herself without compensating her, right? So we were, did you want to say? Yeah. So it's interesting too. So that's at the forefront of what's being discussed. But even when you talk to like Arvind Krishna, who's the senior vice president of hybrid cloud and director of IBM research, he has this quote, "I think teaching AI is what's melodic or beautiful is a challenge of a different kind, since it's more subjective, but likely can be achieved. You give AI a bunch of training data that says, I consider this beautiful, I don't consider this beautiful." So here you have the head of IBM research who's conceiving of art only in terms of its formal qualities, whether it's beautiful or not. And that's kind of shocking, right? That he's talking about art in this way, especially considering where we are since, Duchamp's Fountain, here we are, and we're still talking about these formal values, this postmodern turn against formalism, and beauty restructured, obviously, the criteria of contemporary art as a value system tied to abstract, symbolic, and a financial matrix. And then, of course, the field of neuroaesthetics has sought to study the neuro basis for contemplation and creation of a work of art for a while. Since 1999, neuroaesthetics was coined. But these formal properties, line, shape, color, are inputs that measure the functions of the human brain's physiology, rather, not the structure of an AI model. So we proposed a project in 2015 about the potential of the predictive capabilities of an AI model predicting artworks that we could make or other artists could make. And we still feel like we're pretty far from that, though we are more invested in conceptual art practices. When ChatGPT first came out, my friend texted me and she tried it by asking ChatGPT to suggest works that she's an artist, works that she might produce, and or works she has produced. And she right away, they said her most notable work was called The Masturbating Feminists. And she never made this work, though she might now. But it hallucinates these potential artworks that we can make. So of course, a lot of my friends and we have looked into what sort of suggestions ChatGPT has for us for our next work. And I asked it just the other day, and some of the titles were unveiled, uncovering disruptive networks, unseen boundaries, digital shadows, shadows of past and presence, and echoes. These are titles of the works they proposed for us. Granted, our web presence is limited, but this is what it determined.
We're at about 20 minutes, right? Just to let you know, you can keep going with
Yeah. So I'll just say that I'll skip this part of all of the sort of techniques or things that it proposed. It was always a montage of people and a montage of strategies. And in the end, it's suggested code breakers, unveiling the hidden system that delved into surveillance and invisible labor. And it's suggested to allow individuals to share their encounters with data-driven systems, highlighting the ethical, social, and psychological implications, which feels very much like what we're doing here today. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Very interesting talk. ChatGPT's accommodating response. Preliminary, this discussion touches on AI, transcendental states, and artistic agency. While attributing transcendental states and artistic agency to the AI raises interesting points, the use of terms like dreaming and hallucination to describe its process may stem from the desire to bridge the gap between computational processes and human creativity. However, it is important to recognize that AI operates on statistical patterns, lacking subjective experience and consciousness. While it can be a powerful tool in artistic creation, it's still ultimately a product of human design and programming, which is very generic, I thought. But I was thinking, while you were speaking about, there's an interesting text that I read recently called The Afterlife of Go, about the Go, the Chinese chess game Go, because it was one of the first sort of games to be figured out predictively. So before even the chess that we have, European chess, Go was figured out by artificial intelligence machines. They could play better than the best Go players. And because of that, the best Go players sort of turned into more theoretical realm. Actually, they stopped playing. They started thinking more about the nature of Go and its structures and its usefulness and its sort of applications in social life. And they kind of expanded Go into other domains. So I was thinking, how do you think? Of course, AI is going to be used as a type of tech as a tool in artistic creation, as you exemplified by your friend there. Do you think it's going to be similar to like photography, what photography did to painting, in the sense of like, not that it's going to compete in the same ground, but force art into some other ways of merit, other types of merit? What do you think? How do you think art could absorb the potentials of AI? How do you think it can shape the scenario?
Okay. Was two quick answers for me, at least. Basically, the training sets for the properties of what ChatGPT probably considers, and also like the text to image models, are based on the archive of digital art. So the reason that Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, and other works kind of look stylistically like have those features is because that's precisely what's being trained on. So I would say the potential for collaboration is actually like probably at a cognitive level where we're thinking through kind of thinking through certain I was just going to keep it simple. Thinking through certain projects is actually where there's like a far more potential with these models, whereas the stylistic and formal ones, even if it can infer color, we'll end up with work that looks like kind of NFT art by and large.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much. Very nice talk.
And the continuation of your last talk, I think Parallel Machine I thought was very interesting too. Now we'll go to Anilongo. Are you there, Anil?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Hello. So Anilongo obtained her PhD in aesthetic philosophy at University of Paris 1. She is a member of Collège International de Philosophie and has taught at the University of Panthéon-Sorbonne and Cal Arts in Los Angeles. She is also an instructor at the New Center for Research and Practice, and her research crosses several fields. She is the author and editor of several books on metaphysics, epistemology, and aesthetics. Anilongo, you can, you can go.
Hi. So I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides. Is it possible, no?
What?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence and environment. So here I have a report. So the images, the charts that you will see are from this Artificial Intelligence Index report 2023 by the University of Stanford. First, I'm going to show you how the domain of artificial intelligence, and in particular the application to language have been growing. So in 2002, as you can see, the sector, the domain which has been developed the most is language. So ChatGPT and all the other applications. So we had 23 significant machine learning system in language, which is something new. So it's the domain which has been developing faster in the last years. We can also see from this other chart that the developers are private companies. The development of artificial intelligence, and in particular language models, is really expensive. Public institutions like universities cannot afford it. So they are developed by private companies. Private company means that it made for profit, no? Okay, then another interesting thing to remark is the number of parameters. So the number of parameters is really increasing. So as you can see here, from the beginning, we have a very fast increase of a number of parameters, and in particular for language application, for language models. As you can see, all in the last 4 years, the system which are the most parameters are in application concerning language. And it's also really expensive. We talk about millions of dollars which are invested in order to develop this really complex system with a lot of parameters. Of course, more parameters also means more computing capacity, computing power. And so the computing power has been increasing a lot. And as you can see in this chart, you have the increase of computing capacity, computing power, or computing resources which are needed And by sector, meaning that industry is investing more than the others. So private actors are investing more in order to develop this system with a lot of parameters, which are really costly in terms of money for the moment. In this other chart, we have the same increase in computing capacity, in computer resources which are needed for domain. So again, we can see that language models are increasing the computational capacity which are needed. The apparently good news is that the price is decreasing. So the same computational capacity is cheaper today than it was before. So we could say, okay, we are saving. No, we are not saving because we are creating more. No, so it's an abundance. So we could say, okay, we can have more computational capacity for less money. We are not saving money, we're just producing more. So here you can see that the capacity is, so the efficiency, the economic efficiency is increasing. So all these things are actually fueling the development and the spreading of these researches and these investments in the development of artificial intelligence, and in particular language model. But there are some important implications. The environmental impacts of this system. So the increased computational capacity has a lot of effects on the environment, meaning that, for example, the global CO2 emission of the information and communication technology sector is around 200% of global CO2 emissions. And for example, according to an MIT research, the cloud now has a larger carbon footprint than the entire airline industry, which is a lot. So we usually think that the airline industry is one of the most polluting industry, but no, because the information technology has the same kind of footprint. A single data center might consume an amount of electricity equivalent to 5,000 homes, which is a lot. Also, according to this research from the MIT, training just one artificial intelligence model can emit more 626,000 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent. Carbon dioxide equivalent means that it's not carbon dioxide, but it's something which has the same polluting effects, in particular on climate change, on global warming. And these emissions, which are related to training just one artificial intelligence model, is nearly 5 times the lifetime emissions of an average American car. And this includes the manufacture of the car itself. And as we saw before, the models are increasing in number. So we try to decrease the number of cars which are circulating, but we are actually augmenting the number of artificial intelligence models which are trained and developed. So it's actually compensating for all the efforts in reducing car circulation. Here we have the environmental impact of machine learning models in 2022. So it's really difficult to calculate basically the footprint of machine learning models. So the numbers here are, I mean, have been calculated according to some parameters. Not all the information are available. So they might be slightly different from the chart. You have that the CO2 emission for ChatGPT were 502 tons in 2022, and then here we have other models. So here it's only about the infrastructure, the data center, the materials which are used to build them, and the training. But then there are other estimations which are estimations in real life. So how long is the training? How much is it used? The diffusion of the system. And so here we have another graph. And according to this graph, GPT-3 produces 502 tons of carbon dioxide, which is a lot, only in 2022. So ChatGPT might have been consumed as much electricity as 175,000 people only in January 2003. So the moment we were all experimenting ChatGPT, we were actually consuming all this electricity.
Anna, just really quickly, you're at 10 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry. We're kind of pressed for time, but you can keep going just to let you know that we're.
Okay, so this is it. I mean, I just wanted to highlight this footprint and the pollution which is caused by the development of this artificial intelligence. In a situation in which resources are running out, climate change is dramatic. And so what I want to say is that maybe the priority would be to develop other kind of technologies, to think about other kind of problems. And I think that the political issue here is to choose which is the technology that we want to develop and what we really need to develop. That's it.
Thank you, Anna. I didn't want to cut you out. We're over time, but that was very interesting. This was an interesting response from ChatGPT because their response was absolutely non sequitur, that it was not about the abstract very much. It was ChatGPT said, Longo's perspective on ChatGPT favoring existing opinions and reducing space for creativity raises important considerations. It's not
really related.
AI language models like ChatGPT are trained on large amounts of data. While ChatGPT can assist in generating text, it's crucial to foster critical thinking, creativity, and dissent. Balancing the use of AI language models with human judgment is essential to prevent the suppression of originality and diverse viewpoints.
This is the hallucination part.
Yeah, it's not at all. It's still in the same mode of generic self-defense, but not at all addressing the topic, I guess. Which is an interesting one. It's the first time that it does that.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask Jim. He has a quick question, and then we just move on to our panelists.
Yeah, my question is, like, is this like, I mean, the data and the knowledge that you provide us is widely available, right? So
Yeah.
policymakers, people are aware of this. So I'm just gonna be like hallucinating and saying like, is it the planned obsolescence of humanity that is just like, it's just gonna like race through, actually it's gonna like speed up the extinction of humans towards like some kind of like, I don't know, like an elite society where there's like few rich people live, and then the AI will just like run whatever they need for them, you know? Like maybe this is like, maybe this
Yeah,
is
no,
the
the problem is that artificial intelligence and this kind of learning model are fueling economic growth at the moment. And I mean, there are two perspectives. One perspective is if there is no economic growth, it's a catastrophe for humanity because there is no more money. The other point of view is, okay, we are destroying the planet, so it's a catastrophe in another sense, meaning that it's not because of economics, it's because of destruction and death.
Yeah, so not only does it not help, but it also is actively like creating more problems.
it's like zigzagging between these two catastrophes. Catastrophe caused by economic downturn, catastrophe caused by climate change.
Yeah.
And then they are covering up by saying that thanks to artificial intelligence, we will solve all the problems or environmental problems.
Yeah.
Saying that artificial intelligence can help us to solve the problem, to make models, to make the systems more efficient. The problem is that the more efficient use of energy are only useful in order to increase the number of systems which are produced. It's
so
the
capitalism, right? Like
it's the rebound effect, no?
Or maybe we
So
will
it's
find.
cheaper, so we use more.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Anna. And now just for the final presentation, we have Rafael. Let me just read his bio really quickly. Rafael Moscardi is a Brazilian independent scholar. He holds a master's in international relations at PUC with a team focused on reading Marx in the Anthropocene by weaving together Marxist ecology and media theory. He's a researcher at the Center for Research and Practice, where he also works and is engaged with several academic institutional groups, such as the Subset for Theoretical Practice and the Study Group on the Philosophy and History of Technology. Please, Rafael. And just a reminder that we have very little time, but I'm very interested in your presentation.
Because he's the moderator, so you have to go there and open that thing that you wrote and change it to him up there so you can see him.
Hello. Can you see me now? It's because it's automatic, the change. Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm going to begin with my talk. So my intervention, Anna's intervention was really helpful for me because it actually helped me situate a lot of what I'm going to say and give it like a grounding, so to speak. And my intervention tries to situate ChatGPT in the context of labor. And when I say in the context of labor, I say it in a very particular way in which labor is the main instance of social validation within capitalist society. So when you think about the employment relation, is the relation where which actually conditions a lot of things, including like citizenship, but particularly if you can actually get paid to join the market all over again and keep the circuit of production and consumption going, right? So this is it's a very interesting and important circuit over there. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about employment generation and everything, but one particular attitude that is important to me in new technologies and when inquiring into them, it's that actually try to forget as much as possible from the question, the big philosophically coded questions of techniques and techne, with a capital P and T, and actually to go through a sort of like I like to say vulgar in a way, historicization of the technical apparatus, right? And so if I want to show precisely or at least like a sketch towards it, that how new technical implements seen from the perspective of labor offer a diagram for historicizing the nexus binding work, energy, and information. And the part of energy, I think, was covered greatly by Anna, and also of information in a way, of material information within the database, within a society's own division of labor. So just to, if we go back to an example of the Industrial Revolution, for instance, the invention of the thermodynamic engine was taken as an issue usually when you talk about it, you talk about it as an issue of one technical lineage, so the technical lineage of carbon-based, replacing another tool, which was actually the water-based factories, the water-based mills and everything, on the ground of efficiency, that it's usually spoken in terms of the output. However, the recent work of the geographers Andreas Malm, very good historical work, shows that this history is not only misleading but false. For instance, if you compare the output numbers of water motion powered machines with the coal powered machines, you show that actually the water powered motion was more efficient. In fact, the technical move away from water motion back then was motivated not really by the efficiency of the machine itself or by the output of the machine in itself, but for the access to a larger labor pool that you could actually have when you move the factory to a city instead of productory colony that you could have close to a river and so on and so forth. So actually the main output that we have, and also it would allow the machine to actually have a more, even if smaller, a more regular flux of outputs that would allow for the management of the workplace in a better way. So the main point being that it is not really about the efficiency of the machine as such, but actually in the like this lineage was only opted precisely because it helped disempowering labors in the process. And in British history, for example, you see that one of the most militant labor sectors was actually the coal mining and also the textile sector in particular. And a remarkable feature of the rhetoric around OpenAI and the CEO Sam Altman is to place ChatGPT as having the speculative potential of standing in for the systematization of human knowledge in its entirety and becoming an AGI, so an artificial general intelligence, insofar as the data sets and the parameters that it can compute expand. And there's not much on the energy nexus. Anna has shown us there is a lot, but the consumption is very difficult to estimate in a way. Precisely because it scales with the weights that are used for machine learning. So the better the model, actually, the more consumption you would have. And through the fact that we are in the middle of a gold rush for these LLMs and everybody's trying to develop their own, all the companies, we have like a skyrocketing demand in terms of processing power and database infrastructure. And one of the instances of that is that at the beginning of this year, OpenAI closed a deal with Microsoft to actually access Azure's, which is Microsoft's computer heavy lifter of power and processing power, and to actually be able to access that power to continue developing itself, very close to what was the launch of ChatGPT 4, right? Which will demand even more computational power. And the main selling point of OpenAI as a PR initiative and so on is that it is focused less on fact-checking and more imitating the reasoning process, right? So for instance, GPT-4 has already 40% better at that in the metrics that they themselves provide. And one of the other main points that they bring into being is that they're like ChatGPT is such a good knowledge because it hears from its users, so it learns from the feedback that people post, and it also in a way actually has safeguards placed by the company in terms of speech, free speech, and everything, and keeping things a certain liberal and democratic veneer within it. However, it is worth mentioning that despite the rather misleading name, OpenAI is not an open source product, but an open access one. And of course, there have been some leftist critiques about that particular feature, but the detractors are still vigilant about the careful breaks, which ChatGPT, so to speak, claims that it has. So for instance, Elon Musk was also involved in OpenAI, expressed concerns to the way that these safeguards are being used. And he did that publicly in a experiment he performed with ChatGPT, a hypothetical experiment in which he tried to make ChatGPT say racial slurs in order to save somebody else's life, and then ChatGPT failed to perform that task, and then supposedly it is another weapon in the wokification of culture or something like this. And but if you thought you could get out of a job with ChatGPT and live in a world without employment as the main validation mechanism of citizenship within capitalism, you have to think again, of course, because as Sam Altman says, human creativity is limitless, and we find new jobs and we find new things to do. So yeah. He shortly also highlights applications to education and health as the most crucial, and in his vision, ChatGPT is described as a co-pilot. But when we look at the small experiments that we have been having about it, we see that the co-pilot might be too close to taking the steering wheel, both for ChatGPT and other LLMs. So researchers from the University of Zurich found, for instance, that this is very ironic if you think about it, that ChatGPT actually outperforms the crowd workers that do text annotation tasks in AI training. So actually, it is a better training than the trainers itself for that particular Mechanical Turk type of online labor. And recently, the National Eating Disorder Association has replayed the human-operated program that they had with a chatbot that was called Tessa. And it's an even less modern language model than ChatGPT. And this was done precisely, coincidentally, according to the PR of the company, amidst a unionization claim from workers. Now, if you look at the way in which service workers in particular have to deal with it, it seems that this is an urgent task to actually talk about like those talk-based works, telemarketing, and so on, because these are very at risk in that moment. So if we summarize, ChatGPT is described as a risky novelty, but also that one that with the right steermanship and collaboration from everybody feedbacking it, the worst foreseeable consequences could be mitigated, right? And this rhetoric is not new. We go back again to the Industrial Revolution, in which it subsisted on the one hand, the fear of the machine, but also the hope that the spread of the machine would come together with a collective taking of consciousness, and that the knowledge making the machine would be democratized together with the ubiquity of the machine as well in the social organism, and including in the structure of the state as such. So you have, for instance, debates around the March of the Intellect around the 1800s. They are very remarkable in that particular case because they bring together both a demand for education on the mechanical arts of the time and also its placement as a driver of social change. And if we go back to Marx and his thought about machines, it's often very reduced to the fragment of machines, which is the text in which is mostly quoted. It had its acceleration this moment and so on. But this is a heavily utopian text, right? So Marx claims that knowledge may become the enemy of the workers as soon as it is crystallized in machines. And this comes from an actual engagement. It's a socialist utopian tradition at his time, from William Thompson and others, and that has intellectual labor as a crucial moment of creation, valued in a far higher register than actual manual labor. And the promise that the machine actually will be liberatory for the schism between manual and intellectual labor. Notably, Marx had an never had a unreserved optimism about the machine, but he still kept the vision that in that particular manuscript, that there is a separate intellectual veneer to labor versus manual labor, and that intellectual labor determines this relationship from above. However, this optimism is precisely that which still survives amidst the claims of ChatGPT being a new layer of knowledge with the capacity to form an aggregated, democratized layer of knowledge. But in Capital, there is a key to that sort of conundrum, right? Because Marx actually never speaks back of the concept of the general intellect, and he replaces with the collective worker. And it comes as a reflection on Babbage's, and this is documented, right? Like Babbage's famous insight that the factory space contains a wealthy mind of knowledge, meaning that there is no higher layer that in a detached manner invents new forms ex nihilo. So rather what we have are professionals that unconsciously embody the profit-seeking gaze of capital, out of which emerge a certain capture of the activities of the laborers. This insight is particularly well formulated by Matteo Coscunelli and Vladan Joler in their New Scope Manifesto, which is that the division of labor is itself the antediluvian form of machine learning, where procedures emerge and start being formalized only afterwards, only that we can be pushed to a certain level of precision. But there is a dual movement at place here. The mere abolition of the division between intellectual and manual labor is already taking place right now, as in the perspective of capital, more sectors of intellectual labor are getting placed through ChatGPT. But the thing is that ChatGPT is so striking and such an interesting object because it demystifies spheres of intellectual labor in the services sector that were still relatively mystified. And it does so in middle of a very big arch of stagnation in the generation of jobs. The economist Aaron Benanav diagnoses that the service sector is a big cushion today that absorbs most of the people into work because precisely there is a general stagnation in job generation in industrial labor because it has been heavily automated and also not that much incentivized by some of the more open economies after the 70s and 90s. And in high income countries where you see a growing tendency towards the creation of unstable jobs, so if you see 60% of the jobs created in the 90s and the 2000s by OECD are actually informal jobs. In developing countries, the service sector is already what employs most of the people in places such as Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, and the Philippines. And to add insult to injury, many of these places face chronic deindustrialization, Brazil being one of them. And the thing is that the future delivers neither a techno-utopia nor an automatic revolution towards a post-capitalist economy, but a world of stagnation, with a saturated third sector and ever more informal work conditions in which the first and second world themselves become more like the third world. Our bright future is not composed of a high-tech economy, high-tech specialized workers, but actually of all things that the service sector can actually provide quickly and informally. Street food vendors, barbers, home-based sales of food on demand, precarized language teachers, the proliferation of a gig economy through delivery apps and matchmaking service apps, and an unending stream of invented services and the issues that they raise, some of which including even try to replace care labor from the household, so the little that was left of it, that is. And but in case of malfunction of this circuit, worry not, there will always be a bot ready to chat to help you with that. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafael. Yeah, here's the quick answer from ChatGPT. The future of labor and the potential replacement of human workers by AI is a topic of concern. While AI, including language models like ChatGPT, can automate certain tasks and roles, the complete replacement of human labor with AI is a complex and nuanced issue. It is crucial to strike a balance that leverages the advantages of AI while ensuring that human skills, expertise, and adaptability are not undermined. A responsible approach involves redefining job roles, reskilling the workforce, and finding ways to integrate AI technologies in a manner that enhances productivity and well-being rather than causing widespread unemployment. And I was thinking as you were talking about like the whole throughout the whole conversations, I was thinking about how ChatGPT doesn't really show how it can be intelligent, but it shows how we can be very dumb like most of the time, and that many of our jobs are just very bullshit, very stupid, and
like David Graeber, yeah, bullshit jobs.
Exactly. Many of our jobs are just very they're not very productive, and they're just very repetitive and mechanical. And I was also thinking of education actually, and how we are in a situation right now that students are using ChatGPT to write their papers, or do their labors, and professors are using ChatGPT to correct the exams and do their labor. So no one is doing anything properly speaking. And I was thinking of Zizek's, he has this story about like the perfect date for him would be you have this mechanical sexual organ, the female mechanical sexual organ and the male mechanical sexual organ, and you put them to have like sexual relationships, and you just talk to your partner without
so the tension and all
you
the
don't have
stress
tension,
is taken away,
the performance
so you can just talk.
and have some wine or something like that. And that's basically what's kind of happening in education. I feel like that students are not doing the work anymore. They just put it through ChatGPT. Professors are not correcting anymore. Just put it to ChatGPT, and they can all go about their lives and just enjoy the day. That skips the whole education part, but the labor of it is mechanical. It was always mechanical. So, Rafael, what do you think of like the fact that most of our jobs are already mechanical and bullshit, and how do you think we can solve that? I'm pretty sure you've researched a lot on like universal basic income and other like ways out of labor and the end of labor. What do you think about that? How do you think ChatGPT plays into that or against that?
Yeah, I think that with the question you were talking about academia in particular, I think there's two. First, I think this connects very well with what João and Erica were saying, because actually these like the main this Zizek play with the mechanical dildo and the other the sexual relation being watched from the outside comes from a book on aesthetics, which is called Interpassivity. Actually, it develops this concept of, it's by Robert Fowler, if I'm not mistaken. It develops the concept of interpassivity, and it's a rather interesting argument in the sense that it says that actually you might actually enjoy the task more from the outside and seeing it happening in the other way around and actually engaging with it, because the task itself is resumed to a shore and it's resumed to a certain like boundary breaking moment, right? And I think that this comes also like with academia. Academia has become so protocolar, both in the sense of like what counts for feedback, what counts for interaction, what can be said, what can be not said, that sometimes it's actually better to, you would actually perform better if you can fit within that construct and you can automate that. And I think it can be a freeing thing in the sense that it might show the meaninglessness of some of the evaluation systems that we have, and it might move people towards something else. But then again, I think that academia is not really interested in it at all. I think it still wants to help its veneer as the only thing that can actually validate good or bad scholarship or something like this. But this validation in itself is becoming everything is losing its ballast, right? We had the loss of the code standard, we had the loss of the beautiful, as Erica was talking about. So I think it's about time that we lose the this almost aristocratic, intellectual aristocratic validation baton that tells you, oh, this is good knowledge being produced within this structure, this is bad knowledge being produced over there. And I think that a lot of things are like, you see increasingly other sentiments about peer review and this process that have been taking like that. So I think it's we are looking at a future in which these things will become more and more meaningless.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting. Just because more bullshit. Yeah. I wonder if we should do questions or not, because people were hanging out to also do the questions and they're been waiting to do the questions, but we are also like 40 minutes beyond the time.
Let's just see if somebody has an urgent question and they're here, why not?
Anyone want to talk? But also like 3 of our guests have left because they have time constraints. But we are down to, I mean, I would just talk to whoever wants to talk.
Yes, if any of you have any questions, please come forward to the microphone so people at home can also.
And that also includes the people at Zoom, the 20 or so people who are still watching like bravely.
Maybe scroll up and see if there's like a question. I don't think so. I don't see any questions.
Complimenting Reza.
Yeah.
And
Reza complimenting.
Right. Yeah.
But I just wanted to like do a little like synthesis of I think the contrast between Ellie's presentation and Anil was the most sort of like
stirring
to me, but also like how to factor in Reza's understanding of it,
which is crazy to me. It's like so radical.
And yeah, there's a lot to think, I think. And I think maybe this can be transcribed, or maybe we ask for the papers, maybe we try to like ask for paper and publish it because I think we did something interesting, especially your presentation was fantastic.
Very good. Yeah,
you know, I just wanted to say something about your presentation, which is when I first began talking to ChatGPT in Farsi, because it was also new. I totally felt like I'm speaking with the supreme leader of Iran. I'm religious because of how like the rules of language, you absorb them when you're young unconsciously. I learned English later with much more understanding of rationality and language being a tool, right? So when I spoke English with ChatGPT, it was much more so like I'm talking to a tool. But the minute I switched,
dad or something.
No, not really. Just like some dumb tool. But whenever I switched to Farsi, I really felt like my heart would start like feel differently. And because of his proficiency in Farsi would blow me away. It would write back to me as a real scholar of Farsi. And that incredible. Its ability to use Farsi better than me would really impress me and make me feel, and I had to fight it. They're like, no, you're not talking to a higher authority. This is just the same dumb machine. And I feel those who English is for them the primary language, or if you speak to ChatGPT in primary language, you really have to sort of like guard against that, because it really appears to you as a voice from above, like your presentations, but more in the language in your mother tongue than languages that you acquired later. I really wanted to add that to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to say something, or are you good?
I have to take the train to Lisbon.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know if you have specific questions. If you do, we can just chat, not chat. And yeah, let's just talk. Thank you very much for staying so long. All of you are here still.
And those online.
Those online too. Yeah. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed. Okay.
The video will be available within a few days on our platform.
YouTube.
Yes, for those who missed it.
I think there's a final thing about the seminar, right?
Oh yeah, there's something I wanted to say. Thank you
Move
very
the
much.
camera to him.
We just announced a new seminar at the New Center, which
Oh, that's true.
yes, I really have to like announce this. It's a great
Rômulo, vira a câmera pouco. Just so you can get more. Yeah.
Actually, I moved from that page. Do you want to announce it? You're the best person to announce it. Just go back to.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. So basically, this is
If you have it, put it on the screen too, because it's kind of like people can kind of see the title and all that.
yeah, I can do that. Give me one sec.
You have to share your screen, right?
Yes. Let me just allow it.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just it's
We said
like,
so many things about ChatGPT that I think all the tech in my house is acting up against me right now. So let me just one sec. Yeah. Wait a minute. Oh gosh. Yeah, it's not allowing me to share. Give me one sec.
Just read it then, no?
I can just read it. I found it.
Okay, good.
So yeah, so instructed by Jomoko Fernandez and Sebastian Zimmerhacke, as part of our transdisciplinary studies and art and curatorial practice plus post-planetary universal design, we are announcing this seminar called Hybrid Intelligence, Generative AI, and Human Creativity. The seminar is actually like a workshop in basically prompt writing and how to use these tools and kind of like incorporate them into your own creative process as a writer, as a researcher, or an artist.
Prompt workshop.
Yeah, it's basically how to write the proper prompt and how to kind of fool the machine to help you kind of like propel your creativity.
Okay.
The instructors have been kind of working with these systems from the beta time, and then they're being given like workshops by companies to go in and teach their staff how to use these technologies. So I was very lucky to find them and invite them to teach this seminar. It's not theoretical, and it's kind of hands-on, and it would include a lot of assignments, and the goal of it actually produce a like a narrative-based animation. Yeah, so that would be, and then through workshops with tools that some of them have not even been announced, because the one that turns the prompt into video has not even been made public, but the instructors have access to it. So the students will get a chance to sort of like use all sorts of AI systems. So yeah, so we just announced it, and the starting dates will be from August 4th forward in 2 modules, and there will be a week in between that you can have time to go and sort of like do your assignments and like work on it, and then with the goal of producing a narrative-based animation at the end. Yeah, so for more information, visit the New Center website, and then you can read a full description of the seminar. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I totally forgot.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, maybe stop the recording or something.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Lovely.